Welcome back to James Hutchings Music, recording my attempts to create a program which will in turn generate good music without relying on data from other people's music. So in the previous video, I concluded that the music that the program had created sounded like real music. It sounded like it could be a real chord progression, but it sounded like the background of a piece of music. It didn't sound like the part that the listener was meant to be focusing their attention on. It sounded like the backing of that, the music that's sort of in the background that contributes to the effect, of course, but isn't the main focus of attention. And so I said that I was going to concentrate on trying to create something that sounded more like the foreground of music, that sounded more like what the listener would be focusing on. So I'm going to play you my attempt at that, or the results of the program that I wrote with that in mind. I'll play through it twice and then we'll talk about it. And once again. All right. So to my ear, that sounds like if it was in a piece of music, it would be the bit that you were listening to. It sounds like the sort of main figure of a piece of music. It sounds to me like it might be perhaps music for a thriller or something like that, some sort of film which was trying to create a feeling of tension because the music has a lot of relatively dissonant intervals, although it does resolve to that more consonant one, which is part of how the program works, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The program generates 4 bars worth, and I just repeated that because, of course, in a real piece of music, you wouldn't just get the 4 bars and then it stops. You'd get, it would repeat several times, and I just wanted to see whether the transition from the last bar to the first bar sounded okay. So let's talk about the program. Let's get into Twine. So this is quite straightforward, probably simpler than the programs that we've talked about before, but I'll go through it quickly. We have the note names. We've dealt with that before. We have a quick note to ourselves, which says intervals of 0 or 2 semitones are forbidden, have to end on interval of 4, 7 or 12 semitones, start with ending and work backwards. So we have a set rule that the 4th bar, in this case, because we've set it to be 4 bars long in this bars variable, we could change that quite easily, of course, but in this, as it is, it's 4 bars. We want it to end on something that sounds relatively stable. So I specified 4, 7 or 12 semitones, which is quite subjective. These are all intervals. Well, the octave is considered a very stable or consonant interval. 7 semitones is a perfect fifth. That's also considered very stable, very consonant. 4 semitones is a bit more of a slightly unusual choice. That's a major third. And so if you're playing a major chord, which is probably the chord most commonly used in Western music, if there's easily the chord most commonly used in Western music, that would be the lower 2 notes of that 3-note chord. And I guess because I'm used to hearing major chords, as most of you probably are as well, that feels nice and stable to me. Although traditionally there are considered to be more consonant intervals, specifically a perfect fourth is, most people would probably consider that more consonant than a major third. But anyway, that's what I chose. As with anything else, all of these judgments are subjective. Why did I forbid 2 semitones but not 1? Well, purely I played it on the guitar and 2 semitones sounded wrong and 1 semitone sounded good. Maybe that's just because I'm used to the Jaws theme, which uses a movement of 1 semitone. I don't know. I'm just, I'm going by ear, which ultimately is all that we can do when we're talking about music. We can't really objectively theorize and sort of prove that one sort of music or one way of doing it is better than the other. Ultimately, it is just what it sounds like. So we have 2 arrays, low note and high note. They're just going to be lists of the notes in the form of numbers. We only turn the numbers into the way into the way we talk about notes, which is a letter and an accidental and a number. So something like C3 or D sharp 4. We only think about we only do that right at the end. It's easier to deal with them as numbers throughout the program. There's a little note here that says how I am meant to sort of interpret the output, how I'm meant to take what is displayed on the screen and put it into MuseScore or whatever music notation program I'm using. And it's fairly straightforward. We have a low note and a high note, and each bar is eighth notes of alternating the low note and the high note. Of course, hopefully soon I'll be able to export files directly without having to put them in by hand. So I sort of thought that I'd have that done by now, but I've run into some problems with getting advice on how to use how to do that, how to use the code. But anyway, so we have low note and high note. That's lists of numbers which represent the notes in each bar. And as it says, we start from the back. We start from the end. The reason we start from the end is that we have this specific ending in mind of a relatively stable interval, 4, 7, or 12. But we don't have any particular beginning in mind other than just this general rule that particular intervals are forbidden. So we set the low note equal to the random range that we've chosen. Then we randomly set the high note equal to the low note plus 4, the low note plus 7, or the low note plus 12. And those are the 2 numbers at the end. Then we work backwards. We have this for loop, which starts with the value bars minus 1, because we've already done number bars. Bars is, of course, how many bars there are in the loop, in this case 4. So we start from bars minus 1. We keep going so long as the value is over or equal to 1, and we decrease it by 1 each time we go through the loop. That's what minus means. It's just an abbreviation that Twine understands, means take 1 away. And then we have the generation in a separate passage. The reason we have it in a separate passage is because we might reject particular results, and so we might need to loop around this particular bit of code more than once, and having it in a separate passage makes that possible. And then when we've finished that, we print the notes. I won't go through printing the notes because that works exactly the same as it's worked since the beginning. It just turns the numbers into a more familiar format. All right. So we start by saying Well, copy the number from the bar before. Then we're going to change one or two of them. We need to work out which ones we're going to change, and we need to work out how much we're going to change it by. And we're doing the familiar thing of how much we're going to change it by is Z, and it's going to be +1 to 4 or -1 to 4. So we've seen this code before. We set Z to a random value between 1 and 4 inclusive, and then we have a 50% chance of changing it to the negative of that. So 3 might become -3, for example. Then we have this other random choice, and this is who are we going to change by that amount. So if Y is 1 or 3, we change low note by that amount. And if Y is 2 or 3, we change high note by that amount. In other words, if Y is 1, that means change the low note. If Y is 2, that means change the high note. And if Y is 3, that means change both of them by the same amount. And then we have to check that that's okay. If Y is 3 and we've changed both of them, it will definitely be okay because we've changed the two of them by the same amount, and the previous interval, or the one in the next bar, that was okay. So the new one is going to be the same interval, and therefore it will be okay as well. But we check even if Y is 3, because there's no point writing code to exclude that. It's just easier to go through knowing that it's going to be fine. If the low note is over or equal to the high note, well, that's a problem because we want two separate notes and one of them lower than the other, and obviously if they swap places, that's a problem. Or high note minus low note equals 2. So we've specifically forbidden intervals of 2 semitones. If either of those things are true, include generate. Well, this passage is generate, so that just means go through this whole thing again. Set low note and high note to be equal to what they are in the next bar, because we're working backwards. Work out how much we're going to change it by. Work out which one we're going to change. Make the changes. Test it again. But eventually, of course, it will get an interval that is acceptable, probably straight away, because we've set up that most intervals are acceptable. We're accepting tritones, for example, in this, which is considered very, very dissonant, but I've arbitrarily decided that they're okay. If I want to create more sort of relaxed, smooth-sounding music, I will probably change that later on, but for now we're sort of being more permissive. And once we've finished generating every bar, we go to print the notes. It basically gives the result, and it gives the result in the form of 2 notes. So it'll low note and then high note. So it'll say C4, C5, or whatever it may be, A3, C4, something like that. And then you just put it into your music program of choice. So that's how that works. What I will probably do next is think of ways to build on what we've got here. So imagine this. Let's get back to the music. Imagine you hear this. Etc., etc. You might imagine that then maybe that after that had happened a couple of times, maybe the figure would repeat, but then there'd be another note under it or over it, for example. So we can think about ways to develop a part, and we can also think about in reverse. How could this begin? Like maybe it wouldn't begin like this. Maybe it'd just begin with the low notes. Maybe it would begin with just an introduction of, say, that note over and over again, or perhaps it would be just the low notes of the figure, and then it would build to that, and then it would add more, etc., etc. So in other words, we're thinking about this is sort of one point in the development of the music. Well, what's the part before that? What's the part after that? How can we think about making more of a structure, I guess, and coming closer to an actual piece of music, which of course is always our goal. But I will leave it there for now. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.